Hey there guys, this is Cole. Welcome to another movie review. Today's movie I'm going to review is a part of a movie franchise that had 5 movies, and today I'm going to be starting this review series with the first movie, and that of course is, as you can tell by the title of the video, Critters, released in 1986. So what is the basic plot and story to the 1986 creature feature movie Critters? Well, the plot of this movie is as follows. After escaping from a maximum security prison asteroid, a band of extraterrestrial flesh-eating criminals unwittingly land on planet Earth. So that's the basic plot synopsis to the movie. So it's a rather simple, straightforward plot, and that's what I like about this movie. But another thing I really like about this movie is the story and the cast. I mean, this movie overall has a really good cast. You got Scott Grimes as the main character, Brad Brown, who was a rather good kid actor in this movie. He's not in the movie for very long, but you have Billy Zane in this movie as a guy named Steve. You got Lin Shaye in this movie who plays Sally, and Lin Shaye I think is a great actress, with movies like Kingpin, which is a rather funny comedy movie with Woody Harrelson and stuff like that. That's a really good one. You got Dee Wallace as the kid's mom in this movie, so that's pretty cool to see her in here. So this movie overall does have a good cast, and yeah, pretty good creature feature movie. Now, when this movie came out, when Critters came out in 1986, the movie, it received mixed reviews from critics and audiences, but it was a big enough box office hit to where this movie spawned 4 sequels. But I actually do rather like this movie, and this movie was actually directed by Stephen Herek, who a couple years after this, Stephen Herek, he would go on to direct the 1989 comedy movie Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, starring Keanu Reeves and Alex Winters, which I absolutely love. Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. It's one of my favorite comedy movies of all time, and easily my top 100 favorite movies. So that right there gives this the extra point. But anyways, let's get into the review of the movie. So the movie starts off where we are introduced to a giant, there is a giant asteroid in space, and on that giant asteroid, there actually are some aliens, the Krites, or the Critters, is what these, well, they're called Critters, but, Krites is another name for these creatures, too, but you also have, these aliens that, you have these aliens that are about the size of an average human being, but their face is green, and these aliens, basically what they do is they will watch someone on a monitor, and then their face will melt, but then they'll put their face back together with their powers and stuff like that. Basically what I'm trying to say is that these aliens can disguise themselves as humans. And no, I'm not referring to the Critters or the Krites, which are the main stars of the movie, but we'll get to that. So I thought, okay, that's cool. I like the idea of a movie that has different types of aliens instead of just one. I thought that was really cool and unique. I like how there are these aliens that are bounty hunters that, can perfectly take the form of a human, but they also, have to go after these small little creatures called Krites. So it's basically like these bounty hunters that have to track down these creatures that escape from prison, but the bounty hunters themselves are aliens hunting much smaller alien creatures called Krites. So I thought that was a rather cool concept for the movie. And then early on in the movie, we are introduced to our main character, Brad, who is played by Scott Grimes, who I'm not all too familiar with this actor, but I thought the actor who played the kid character did rather good in this movie. And another reason I think this movie works is because of the family dynamic of the main characters. Now, I'm not going to say that this movie's a 10 out of 10 masterpiece, because this movie does have its flaws. I mean, this movie, I will say this. This movie is not as good as A Quiet Place, but again, I was not expecting this movie to be as good as A Quiet Place, but But, you know, if the story and the characters work, I can give that a pass. And I think that the story and the characters do work in this movie. And I like the part at the beginning of the movie where Brad, he is sitting at the dinner table with his family eating breakfast, and then, you know, his sister says that Brad has a final test for school today he hasn't studied for. And I like the part where Brad says, you're a craphead. And then the mother's really mad with him. And then the sister and him are not getting along. I thought that part was rather funny. And then not too long after that, you know, in the movie, there is a famous singer on TV by the name of Johnny Steele, who is basically singing with a guitar, and the bounty hunter alien, he's basically watching this screen monitor, but then he uses the technology from the monitor to basically disguise himself as that famous singer, which I thought was rather cool. And again, the guy, he does not have a big part in the movie, but April, who is the second sister of Brad, her boyfriend, Steve is actually played by Billy Zane, and he didn't have a big part in the movie, but I've always liked Billy Zane as an actor, so it was nice to see him in here. And I gotta say, this movie, and I think that the direction by Stephen Herrick here is rather good, honestly. This movie showed that this director had talent, and it definitely carries over to Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, which, granted, I don't think this movie's as good as that movie, but I still rather like this movie. Not too long after that, the main character by the name of Brad, he is basically friends with this guy named Charlie, and basically what happens is, so Charlie is using a slingshot. He is trying to shoot over a soda can, but he accidentally shoots at Brad's sister, and, Brad, he gets blamed for it, he gets grounded, he goes up to his room and stuff like that. But then later that night, the alien spaceship lands with the Krites, or the critters, basically these alien creatures, small ones that escape the farm, and basically the critters, they're these creatures that, the more flesh they consume, the bigger they get. But this movie is not really a horror movie. It's more of a creature feature comedy movie with horror elements to it. But this movie definitely plays along the comedy aspect. This is more of like a comedic type. And that's what I like about this movie. Like, for example, I thought the part early on in the movie where the sister's like, you have a final test today, and then Brad's like, you're such a craphead, and then the mother's mad at him. I thought that scene was funny. And then, the critters, or the Krites, they're basically wreaking havoc on this family's farm, like, early on in the movie. Brad's dad busts him, sneaking out of his room, and he's like, what are you doing out here, and stuff like that. And then, eventually, the dad's like, come with me, because I want to keep my eye on you, and, because the family notices that something crashed in the backyard. They don't know what it is, but Brad and his dad, they basically come across a dead cow with some of its flesh off its face, because the Krites or the critters were eating it and stuff like that, but they don't see the creatures at hand. So Brad asks, what could have done this, and the dad's like, well, I don't know, and stuff like that. But there's definitely some really solid scenes in this movie, like the scene, for instance, where there's some very funny bits in this movie, like, I like the part where, so now granted, these creatures don't talk, at least not in normal human language, like they basically make like grunting noises, but there's basically subtitles on the screen whenever they do speak, so we understand what they're saying. But my favorite part of this movie by far is when the critters, they're basically destroying one of the family's bedrooms, and one of the critters is basically looking at like this stuffed animal toy, but the stuffed animal toy in question actually just so happens to be E.T. from the 1982 Steven Spielberg movie E.T. the Extraterrestrial, and I like the part where the critter just looks at it. It's like, screw this, and then the critter just starts eating it, bites the toy's head off. I thought that was rather funny, and I do rather like E.T. the Extraterrestrial. That is a good movie. I would like to review it someday down the road. And remember how I said, one of the aliens disguised themselves as Johnny Steele? Well, one of the aliens disguises itself as Jeff, one of the police officers who is attacked by one of the critters in the movie and dies. But But basically, these bounty hunter aliens are after the alien small creatures, krites, or critters, which I thought was a rather cool plot. And then near the end of the movie, of the main character, Brad, he's trying to get help and stuff like that because, well, his sister, April, her boyfriend, Steve, was basically killed by one of the critters, and, April's freaking out, and, Brad is able to defeat one of them, and eventually the dad gets injured. He can't really walk, at least not very well, that is, and these creatures aren't playing around, so to speak. But I like the part near the end of the movie where Brad, the main character, he basically runs to the cop car to basically tell the cops what happened. But little does he know that it's Johnny Steele, and little does he know that it's two alien bounty hunters who disguise themselves as humans. Johnny Steele and Jeff. But eventually, the kid picks up on it, and the kid basically says he needs their help and stuff like that. So then the bounty hunters, they do agree to come to his place, and the bounty hunters defeat the critters, the krites. Brad manages to rescue his family. And then at the end of the movie, the bounty hunter who is disguised as Johnny Steele basically gives Brad a radio to talk to, and he's like, oh, cool, thanks. Basically as like a phone to stay in contact, because you got to keep in mind, this movie came out in 1986. iPhones were not a thing. And so, yeah. And then I like the part at the end of the movie where Brad, he pushes one of the buttons on the remote, and keep in mind, I forgot to mention this, but Brad, one of his friends, his partner, Charlie, manages to chuck a dynamite stick in the propeller of the alien spaceship. Once Brad and his sister escape, the aliens fly it, but then basically the spaceship explodes, and so does the house that the family lives on. But at the end of the movie, Brad basically pushes one of the buttons on the remote, and the remote, it put in the remote perfectly, and the house is completely damaged. It's totaled. But Brad pushes the button on the remote, and the remote perfectly repairs the house, all normal, and then the family lives happily ever after. So, yeah, not a perfect movie. I guess, really, if I only have two flaws with this movie, the end, I guess in a way, the ending could be kind of a negative because it does have a sequel bait ending, and I do think that, now I will say, most of the special effects hold up, the practical effects and stuff like that, but there is some digital effects that don't age well. But other than that, I think Critters is a rather solid creature feature movie. And when it comes to the Critters franchise, I do rather like the first two movies, and I will be reviewing the second movie soon, so stay tuned for that. But yeah, at the end of the day, this is a rather solid movie, and I am going to give Critters an 8 out of 10. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching my review, and I'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.